Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Tamp Podcast. In this series, we will be sitting down and discussing in depth all sorts of topics with people from all walks of life, from the worlds of journalism, music and film, the arts, athletes, business people. We plan to sit down and discuss current topics, personal journeys, and bring you what we feel is a nugget of truth in an increasingly surreal world. Stay tuned and watch what we have to offer, and please don't forget to subscribe to our channels. Our guest today has worked in several leadership positions across Africa, including Promasidor and Guinness Nigeria. During his time there, he developed strong and lasting connections with the Nigerian grassroots and cultural communities. He is a founding member of Green Cycle Nigeria. He has received an OBE from the Queen in 2010, has been conferred with several chieftaincy titles. He is an author and a poet and a local resident and a passionate Nigerian music and art enthusiast. Welcome, Keith Richards.
Thank you, and very well said. I think you got it in a nutshell there.
I tried my best.
Yeah.
And there's stuff I couldn't even fit in there, but I was like, we're not going to have a 15-minute long intro.
No, I'll take that. That's good.
Oh, thank you. What led you to go to Nigeria in the first place?
Well, it's strange because I eventually developed a taste for Nigeria, but when I first went, I wasn't happy at all. So I trained as a teacher, couldn't get a teaching job, so I joined the civil service graduate scheme, and they said, well, old boy, you don't have the right background to join the diplomatic corps, but you want to travel. So they put me in a department collecting Nigerian debts. So my first trips to Nigeria were arriving at the airport and being put in a hired car and then driving around to government bodies like state water corporations and electricity boards and trying to collect debts.
That must have been a bit intimidating.
It was horrible. First of all, no one likes you. No one wants you to be there because you're asking for money. And then it's government, so you're back of the plane. You stay in really shitty hotels, government guest houses, and looking back on it, it's pretty crazy because it was long before mobile phones. And I remember traveling from Kano in the north to a city called Zaria. And I used to do that trip regularly. And in those days, it was in the Guinness Book of Records as the most dangerous road on earth for road accidents.
Wow.
And I used to think, if something happens to me, it's going to be a week before anyone realizes I'm missing. So I didn't really enjoy it. I went to a lot of states, traveled right across the country, and it gave me a good grounding.
I'm guessing Promasidor came before Guinness?
No,
was it the other way
two
around?
spells with Guinness before Promasidor.
Okay. And was I right in understanding you were the CEO of Guinness in Nigeria?
Yeah, I did nearly 5 years as the CEO, which was like just a brilliant job and a lot of fun. I mean, hard work, stressful. We had, 4,000 employees. There were 4 breweries, huge volumes, and we did a lot of interesting things too.
I know, I want to get into some of that later, but what I'd like to get my head around is how did Guinness become such a big deal in Nigeria? Because am I right in understanding they've even got their own blend? Is that right? It's different to the Irish?
Wow. I mean,
or is this industry secrets?
No, I think it's fascinating. I mean, the story Guinness aren't that keen with the story of why they're in Africa, because if you look at the places where Guinness are most popular outside of the UK and Ireland, it's all the way down the coast of West Africa, across the Caribbean, a touch on the eastern seaboard, and then a little bit in the Far East. And basically, the pattern follows the slave trade.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. So the ship's chandlers used to take hogshead of Guinness and bottle it and put it on the ships, because the water would get bad. So they'd be given a bottle of beer a day. And what would happen is, so Nigeria, for example, the ships would moor off the coast. It would take 3 or 4 weeks for the hold to be filled with their evil trade. And so the sailors would save some of their beer ration and trade it with local traders who would paddle out, with bits of ivory, for example, and the sailors would, have few things to trade when they got back. So the beer was being traded into West Africa. And then in about 1830, Guinness commissioned somebody to find out where it was going, because they didn't really understand pretty substantial volumes. And they realized that it was actually the locals that had developed a taste. So, uh, Nigeria is the second or third largest market in the world now for Guinness. And Ghana's huge, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, they drink it in Congo, Kinshasa, Brazzaville, Togo, all the way up that coast. And then every Caribbean island brews Guinness under license.
Okay.
But the recipe is the closest thing to the original recipe. So the Guinness people say to me, "Oh, do you drink the proper Guinness?" And I say, well, define the proper Guinness. Draft Guinness was invented in 1962. It was always bottled Guinness, and the 7.5% proof foreign extra stout, which is what's brewed in Africa and the Caribbean.
So it's stronger than the stuff here.
Yeah, much stronger. And that's closer to the original brew that Arthur Guinness would have stirred in his pot in 1789.
And I'm guessing if you say that the recipe is essentially the same at the core, I'm guessing water plays a big role here, doesn't it?
It does, but it's a bit exaggerated. Like, people would say, it's the waters of the Liffey. I mean, the water is so heavily treated that a lot of the differentiation is taken out in the brewing process. Yeah.
I only ask because obviously making coffee, which I do for a living, being in control of your water and understanding your water is fundamental. Not just for flavor, but for also maintaining the equipment and the longevity of your equipment, basically.
Yeah, so water is important in Scotch, for example. The peaty water gives you the Highland Taliskers of this world, the peaty flavour. But in beer, the processing is so much more intense. It tends to take a lot of that out. So water does have a part, but probably less so in Guinness than, say, Fuller's.
You spent a lot of time working in business in Nigeria, and you got experience of working for multinationals abroad. Now, I read that you've been very vocal and passionate about your belief that businesses, especially multinationals, need to engage more with the environment and the societies in which they are based. I mean, you clearly advocate that, and I think it's fantastic. Is that something you found you were kind of pioneering back then? And is it the same today? Have things evolved?
So I think when I first started going aboard with Guinness, companies like that used to have people that spent quite a few years in Africa. Sometimes they were called Africa hands, and they would engage in the community. A lot of the big companies, for example, you would actually go on a course on cultural understanding. But increasingly, multinationals have become very short term. They send someone for 2 or 3 years. They're bonused on cash related performance over 2 or 3 years. They have no incentive to make longer term decisions. They're not going to understand the community in such a short period of time. They don't get absorbed, and that changes the entire decision making process. So actually, I was sacked as CEO because when I went back, so I'd had a stint with Guinness and travelled across Africa with Guinness in the 90s and the early 2000s. But in 2002, when I started as the CEO, I was brought back by someone who had worked in Africa and who had run Guinness's businesses in Africa for 20 years. But after a couple of years, he retired, and the new guy running Africa said to me, you guys, you go on about African culture. He said, I'm going to run Africa the same way as I would run Belgium. That was his words. And then he started, saying I spent too much time working with local shareholders. I mean, Guinness only owned 52% or something. So is a publicly quoted company. So I had a legal and fiduciary duty for the local shareholders. But increasingly, multinationals are short-term, they're extractive, that CEO wants to get as much out as he can because that's going to gear his bonus. And if that's the wrong decision for the long term, he doesn't care. And I think you see that right across the range of multinationals. And I think understanding it more in terms of my own position gave me a ringside seat for multinationals' behavior generally. And if we look at the extraction that's going on, I mean, just take, for example, all those high-tech billionaires in the States, and their base product is being produced under almost slavery conditions. It's extraction. Why are people not investing proper facilities in Africa, whether it's Nestle for cocoa or Apple and Tesla in high
I was
tech?
going to say electric cars are a big one for
Yeah,
destroying, I mean, the mining that's necessary for these batteries and all of the components.
absolutely. And the world's financial system makes it very, very difficult for people to invest long term and develop these infrastructures. So, and then when you see, if you look at modern African politics, what's happening in the Sahel now, you've got the military leaders of Burkina Faso who've taken over their minerals, and they're forming an African bank of the Maghreb to try and be able to finance and develop a development of their own industry. And the French, the original colonial masters, and the British, the Western banking system are doing everything they can to screw it up, because that means a lot of the wealth will stay in Africa and will not come back to Europe and the States.
I seem to have some sort of recollection of Gaddafi being very close to forming a unity with the North African countries and forming their own currency uh, quite shortly before he was killed.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Is that somewhat
No,
truth?
if a lot of African, I mean, take Sheldon Kuti, someone we both admire as a
Yeah,
musician. He talks very openly about the work that Gaddafi was trying to do to break African banking away from the global banking
yeah.
system, create their own bank, empower Africans. Now, I think in a lot of ways he went the wrong way about it, but I think what he was doing uh, clearly would have benefited local people. And as we know, the Americans they didn't like it very much.
The sad thing about that is it doesn't show much promise for change, because if you're saying that in terms of multinationalism in the biggest companies, it's in their interest to keep Africa the way it is. Therefore, where does the change come from?
Yeah, and I mean, um, the independence in the late 50s and 60s in Africa was set up to tie African countries to their original colonial masters. I mean, the French were masters at it. When they left one or two of their colonies who did not want to join the French financial system, I think Senegal was one, I think, they actually poured cement into the sewers because they said, we built them and you're not having them because and then obviously the British interference in elections in Nigeria and other countries. And then you got Africa was subject to being the proxy battleground between the East and the West in um, the Cold War. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated because the West thought he might favor the Soviets. Angola was destroyed in a battle with Cuba and South Africa acting as the proxies for the West and the Soviets. And then even today in the Maghreb, Russia trying to put troops in, and even Ukraine are now supporting. So even in the Maghreb, what's happening in Sudan, the two forces are being funded by different global powers. So still Africa's being ripped apart by interest from outside Africa. And the only thing that does really give you hope is when you travel around there and you see some of the fantastic people, and you see some of the, I mean, if you take Nigeria, some of the amazing Nigerians in this country. I mean, I went to a 70th birthday a couple of weekends ago, and I was introduced to this gentleman who was the first gynecologist in Britain to do robotic operations. You know, some of the Nigerian medics, unfortunately, working here because the infrastructure in Nigeria is so bad. Um, you know, another example would be in the UK political discourse. We're talking about immigration. We talk about the number of nurses in the NHS who have come from other countries. We are tearing Nigeria apart because they have a nursing college and all the nurses there ambition is to use that to come to the UK. Less than 10% end up nursing in Nigeria. So what does that do for the Nigerian health service? So when people say, oh, independence, the multinationals and even state operatives are still extracting from Nigeria and African countries as we speak.
For some reason, I feel like there is something came into my mind with the way you're describing it, especially the kind of state interference into the countries. My knowledge of Africa is not very deep or extensive. However, of Latin America, it is.
Yeah.
And, with the background that happened in Latin America, the US and Russia have been heavily involved for decades in both the removal and the placement of leaders and the running of countries.
Absolutely.
Whether it be Chile, whether it be Central America, whether it be the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
And if you look at it now, I think this might be a little ray of hope for Africa, because I think obviously you're never going to be free from American influence. In fact, in a way, you need it. But Latin America has broken a lot of those shackles and is kind of, sailing by itself right now in a way that it wasn't 30, 40, 50 years ago.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think when I first started becoming politically aware, it was Allende was, that was what, 72 or 3 or something. And all the way through the Contras, there's this history of it.
Yeah.
And let's see how they survive Trump, because, I mean, the Panama Canal, Greenland, he's such a nutter. Let's hope he doesn't put that process back.
Let's just hope. That's all we can say. This ties in as well. You have worked closely with indigenous organizations, and I'm going to use the acronym here because I don't want to pronounce it wrong. The OIPA.
Oh, yeah.
How important is this work to you?
Tremendously important. And actually, it's really interesting how, so the Orili Igamu, which is a ghetto suburb of Lagos, the Orili Igamu Progressive Association, were a self-help group that they put themselves together to try and better what was a pretty rough area. And at the time, I'd left Guinness and I was looking for another major job, but a friend of mine offered me the chance to write for a local newspaper. And I was writing columns, and OIPA got in touch and they said, oh, we've been reading your columns, and, I'd written some things about the need to empower Nigerian youth. And they said, would you be willing to come to the ghetto and meet some of the youth? So I said, yeah, I'd be delighted. So they said, well, you can't drive in. The area's too rough. You need an escort. So I had to meet them in a fast food restaurant in a Nigerian suburb. Then I got in their car and I was thinking, is this a good idea? It's the last you'll ever hear of me, ransom note. Anyway, we drove through what was a pretty rough area, and actually it's described in the novel that I've written. Those experiences obviously form part of that. And then we got to the semblance of a community hall, And there were like 200 people, and they said, "Here's the guest speaker," and I wasn't expecting it.
And they just shoved you on stage.
But we got on really well, and I just tried to give simple advice. Things like, there's an African adage, how do you eat an elephant? One mouthful at a time. And I was tried to help mentor them in some of the issues they were tackling, take one step at a time. For example, their water was very bad quality. So, I tried to show them how you take the water, you keep a third, you send a third to the government, for testing, you send a third to the business, and, document it and keep the pressure to improve uh, the environment that way. And we stayed friendly. And my sons, when my youngest George came out and we set up Green Cycle together, he based his operations there, and he worked and trained a lot of the young lads from OIPA on taking computers apart safely for recycling. So yeah, that was, and the other thing is, it keeps you grounded. You see people really working hard in difficult conditions. It inspires you.
Interestingly, that's exactly what Raggy said last week.
Oh, really?
On his travels and visiting of war zones and what have you, he says it keeps you grounded.
Yeah.
And it actually makes you appreciate things.
Oh, that's cool.
You mentioned Green Cycle. So I was going to say, you're a founding member of Green Cycle Nigeria. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, so this was my son's project. So I've got two sons. The older one is in wildlife filmmaking, and he's an environmentalist. In fact, he's going to Nigeria next week. He believes the film industry, the wildlife film industry, is also extractive, and they don't do enough to engage with local communities. So that's what he's working on. But the younger one, George, about 3:00 one December 31st night, rang me when I was just going to bed, and he said, Dad, I need to ask you a question. I said, yeah, Happy New Year, George. I'm just going to bed. Talk to you in the morning. He said, no, I need an answer. I said, what is it? He said, do you think we could set up a business doing electronic waste recycling in Nigeria? And I said, George, what the, it's 3 a.m. He said, just yes or no? I said, yes. So he and a friend had this idea, and they came out, and we set this business up because West Africa is a dumping ground.
I was going to say a lot of commercial waste and even state waste gets sent there.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of computers. Now, it has to be looked at in a balanced way, because often youth learn on secondhand computers, so it's not all bad, but a lot of the stuff that is sent is right near end of life, and it's just dumped out there, and it becomes toxic. It's terrible for the environment. So George spent about 5 years setting up a business to take the laptops apart and recycle them, and he had some success. And he trained a number of youths on it, and he worked with a couple of companies that were starting to do it. But it was really before its time in Nigeria, and he couldn't really get the cost. So while he was living with me, he could earn enough money to sort of cover operational costs. But it's a very expensive place to live as an expatriate, because you have to live in accommodation with a generator and a borehole and stuff like this. So he then came back in a master's and is still in the green space. Some recycling was done with OIPA, but we're not working on it at the moment.
Something which just came to mind when you're talking about the OIPA and how they put you in there and you were giving advice. It's very clear that Nigeria as a culture fully embraced you. and you are highly respected, even with the chieftaincy titles. However, I'm just thinking, I'm trying to think, your first arrival there, was there not any difficulty in being a white man, um, kind of in powerful positions or giving advice? Was there not any resentment from the past? Did you encounter anything like that? Did you kind of have to prove your worth at any point?
Um, it took many years before I reached that kind of comfortable relationship, both my own attitude and, you know, most Nigerians just assume you as a white face aren't going to engage. But there's very little anti-white feeling. I mean, uh, and one of the big differences is, the greatest problems and the worst wrongs were done to do with land. So anywhere where white people push people off their land. South Africa is the prime example. But in Kenya, the Kikuyu were pushed off their land and they turned it into the White Highlands and what have you. But Nigeria was such an inhospitable place environmentally, that the British ruled indirectly. So obviously they manipulated local rulers, particularly against each other, but they didn't chase people off their land. And so today in Nigeria, you see a lot more resentment against rich Nigerians than you would against expatriates. So actually, so in all those years I was there and I was going into bars and I was traveling around, I wouldn't go into areas on my own particularly, but I might just go with the salesman or what have you. I wouldn't have security. And I was never had anything but respect and interest why you were in our bar. You have to buy you around, and you have great conversations. I was robbed twice, and they were both within 20 minutes of each other because I was in the wrong part of town at the wrong time, and it was my fault. And there was a traffic jam, and the boys were just coming down, so they smashed my window. I gave them my money and my phone. They no threat at all. I got in the front seat because the back seat was full of glass. And about 100 yards and 20 minutes later, another gang came past.
No way.
And I rolled the window down and said, "Guys, you're too late. You think I smashed my own window? Everything done finished." So they unscrewed the wing mirrors and stole those instead.
Oh my God.
So,
It's interesting. That's a similar sort of, people ask me about, you lived in Brazil, you lived in Rio, it's dangerous, this and that. I've got similar experiences to you.
Right, yeah.
I don't have a bad thing to say. I mean, I know there is danger. I know
Yeah.
it's there. I know it can happen. But in my experience, you can live just fine. You can integrate
yeah.
just fine. So I find that fascinating. Okay, moving on to your books. You've written 3 books,
I
one
have,
novel.
yeah.
The latest is this one we have right here. Which of your sons? Can you tell me a bit about it?
So, which of your sons is set in the modern time, but it's got a historical backdrop, and it's about a young black British lad from Chiswick who gets posted to Nigeria to work for a multinational. And he's just going to do, it's a posting, it's good for his career, he makes some money. His mother, who's Nigerian, wants him to engage, but he's not interested. And then on the flight out, he's met at the airport, and there's an ex-army engineer from New Cross, a bit of a drinker, a bit of a racist. He's a Millwall supporter. No comment. And they strike up an unlikely friendship. But it's the story of how they're drawn into the Nigerian culture. So the black British lad's Nigerian cousin, Isioma, tracks him down and says, what, you've been here, you haven't been to see your family, and she brings him in. And at the same time, there's flashbacks, if you like, or reversion to an incident in 1949. The British shot dead 21 miners for going on strike. During the war, Nigerian coal mines was sending 600,000 tons of coal to the UK war effort. And the conditions were terrible. And they kept saying after the war we'll improve them. And of course they didn't. So they shot these miners. And the transition of the family of one of the miners who was shot through the Civil War to the modern day. And gradually you begin to realize that these two modern day protagonists are descended from the guys that are both sides of the incident. And
fascinating.
And the spoiler alert, that, yeah.
Your previous books were, I guess, how would you describe them?
Well, the first one was just a straight collection of the columns, and a Nigerian publisher got in touch and said that he thought they were, very relevant. It was a newspaper that was associated with the FT. So a lot of the columns were business related, but, you can't help but getting sucked into the politics and social commentary. And so sometimes they were controversial, but unfortunately, they're still relevant today because of the economic situation in Nigeria. And then the second one was part memoir, part business book. Guinness was a very high-profile company in Nigeria, and there was a lot of interest in the issues, some of the historical things that people didn't know about. I mean, exactly as we've been talking about earlier. And then my own journey there as well. So that was, and it was called Never Quite the Insider. The newspaper column was called The Insider Outside. And it's this premise that, people used to say to me, "Oh, Keith, you're a Nigerian, but you're never quite, you're never quite an insider." And interestingly, my Nigerian friends say it reflects the other way around. And, when they're here, they often, never feel quite there as much as an insider. So it has relevance.
Right. Let's go into an area that we both love, music and the arts. Did I read correctly that you are or were a director at the Lagos Jazz Series?
Yeah, that was towards the end of my stay. There was a friend of mine, Oti, a fantastic guy who ran a small jazz and wine cellar, and it was even smaller than Tamp coffee premises. And he made great coffee, which originally, I mean, now you can get good coffee in Nigeria, but there was a time where there weren't good coffee houses, and there was wine, and there was always really good jazz. And then the house rule was at 6 o'clock, laptops had to be shut, and you had to sit around and chat.
Yes.
So because at Guinness, I brought in a lot of, so we brought in Boys to Men, Joe,
Wycliffe, I understand.
Wycliffe Jean, yeah. Wycliffe was just the most amazing guy because he just wanted to embed in the Nigerian music scene, and he did stuff with Nigerian musicians. And then actually he did a kind of autobiography album called Sexa Pa, about his journey out of Haiti. And there was a couple of the songs with the young Nigerian musicians, and he even sent them royalties, and they were blown away. They hadn't expected them. He was a very cool guy.
And am I right in thinking that was his first time in Africa?
Yeah, it was. It was very special for him. So I was just basically, although I was CEO, and it was to this was to launch we changed the shape of the bottle, and we completely rebranded it. It was a major $15 million marketing spend budget. So he came out to do 5 gigs, and I just got to hang out and have time, and we became quite friendly.
And I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, you told me, was it Guinness that for a period of time sponsored a live music venue in Lagos? Did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, from time to time. I mean, there was never one specific one, but we'd sponsored a lot of gigs, a lot of events. And so, when I was there, we brought in these international players, but we also tried to help some of the younger ones. So, for example, one of the first of the Afro beats musicians was Two-Face Idibia, and we did a lot with him in the early days, and then of course Sean Kuti and I got very friendly.
Well, I was going to ask. I was curious. That's one of my questions here. How did I mean? I know that you've got a very close bond. Apparently, even his daughter calls you granddad. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did that relationship come about?
So I had my 50th in a pub in Wimbledon, and there were a lot of Nigerian mates there, and one of them invited this young musician who was studying in Liverpool, who came down by train, and he turned up at the party at 12 o'clock. And of course, parties in pubs finish at 12 or 1. So we had time for a drink together, and then I think I had helped find him a place to crash. So when I was back in Nigeria and he was back in Nigeria, he would hang out. And, Sean was really struggling in early days because he'd inherited the mantle of Egypt 80 from his father. And it was very much hand to mouth. And he was only playing fella songs. So they used to play in a small bar in a suburb called Yaba. And that was a great, and in fact, that occurs in the novel as well, because a lot of the novel is obviously based in my experiences. And we just hung out, and I think there was so much pressure on him as one of Fella's two performing sons, and there's a big age gap between him and Femi, so the relationship wasn't always that strong. There was a lot of pressure on him when he was young, in his 20s. And I think he could just come around my place, have a couple of Guinness, have a smoke and just chill, watch football, because I have to say he's an Arsenal fan, which is one of the things I hold against him. And I think, that just gave him a safe space.
You're like a comfort zone.
Yeah. And, when his now wife, then baby mama, she came to the UK to do a catering course. She stayed with me, and Adara, his daughter, used to. I mean, it's a bit tricky. I remember Addy. So Yeti said, "I'm just going in this shop. Will you look after Addy for me?" That was in Brixton Market, and Adara ran off, and I had to chase her, like this old white bloke chasing a 3-year-old Nigerian. Did look a bit weird, especially when she said, "Get off me, granddaddy."
Oh, well, that's nice, lovely. Now, it's you mentioned Egypt 80 that I wanted to talk about, because just for the listeners, for people to understand, people who may or may not know Sean, I became aware of Sean through Femi, and I actually became aware of Fela through Femi.
Right.
So my introduction to Afrobeat was when Shoki Shoki came out in 1998. For some reason, my brother had that CD.
Right.
And I looked at it, and it's this weird green. Do you remember the green cover?
Yeah.
I was like, "What's this?" And
Yeah, it's kind of luminous.
And I put it on. I was like, "Wow! I've never heard anything like this," and it blew me away instantaneously.
It's one of the best dance albums ever. I think that's really good. You can't sit still, right?
So that was my introduction to Afrobeat. And through there, then I discovered Fela, who his father was, and then you start to understand the impacts of that. And then I came across Sean. So I don't know. It's difficult to know how much of a household name Fela Kuti is, because when you think about what he represents in Nigeria, you can't overstate it.
Absolutely.
I mean, he is as big as you get in terms of culture, politics, representation of the country, everything. So that's why I'm just giving people a little background as to why Sean might find it difficult to live in the shadow.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because of who his father was and what he did for a country. I can't think of many
musicians to have that level of political influence over a whole country. There's only one other that comes to mind. I'm sure you'll probably agree, and it's Bob Marley.
Bob Marley, absolutely, yeah.
I can't think of another one.
Well, I mean, at fella's funeral, they reckon there were 1 million people. And the family thought they were going to take the coffin from, so there's a big assembly place in the centre of town, and they had a celebration there, and then it should have taken them maybe 40 minutes to get back to where he was going to be buried, outside the Calacuta, the home of the Cooties. And I think it took something like 7 hours because it was so many people. And I think Sheldon was 14 and made a speech from the balcony, which I think is probably his first political speech. And yeah, I mean, you talk to people of my generation, Nigerians, and they'll all tell you they were at the shrine. If all those people were at the shrine, it would have been bigger than Wembley Stadium because, it's a badge of honor that you went to the shrine. And people, of course, now say they did, but to the middle classes, he was a pariah, he was scary, he was the Antichrist, but to the masses, he was just, and he took on presidents. I mean, he was arrested over 200 times. He was beaten near death. His mother, so Fumilola, fella's mother, was the first Nigerian woman to have a driving license. She was the first African woman to travel to China to meet Mao. She did so many things. And when the army raided the Calacuta Republic, because Fella had set up this place as a thorn in the side of the establishment, the army came in and threw her off the balcony, and she later died from her injuries.
I didn't know about that.
So yeah, it's phenomenal. And there's several good music documentaries. Music is a Weapon is out there, and if Fella the Musical does its rounds, I recommend it. And Femi's carried it on, Sharon's carried it on, and Femi's son Made is now, I mean, there's a lot of people say he's probably the best musician of them all.
I came across him on Spotify and I was impressed.
Yeah.
I was really impressed.
And he's a really lovely young man too.
Interesting. We mentioned both Fela and Bob Marley in the same sentence, because I think there are a lot of parallels between them. They really are.
So Sheldon told me that Chris Blackwood from Ireland tried to sign Fela because he wanted to do, but Fela refused to play 3-minute songs.
Yeah.
And he's reputed to have said, "You don't ask Mozart to write 3-minute songs. I'm writing African classical music, so don't ask me to." And he wouldn't write less than his 12, 15 minutes.
Exactly. 12, 15 minutes.
So they didn't consider him commercial enough.
But that's probably what stamped his legacy. Maybe it's what stopped him from becoming as big as Bob.
Yeah.
But if we talk about, in his own country, he couldn't get bigger.
Well, I mean, even Afrobeats, all these young guys now, Burna Boy and everything. Now, Afrobeats is not Afrobeat, but they acknowledge their roots and where it comes from. And it also means there was a path for music to come out of Nigeria and Africa and achieve commercial success. So that's really on the back of what Fela...
they're essentially his legacy.
Yeah. And, people like Ginger Baker, he recorded...
I've got him, he's on my notes here. Yeah. So, Ginger Baker, Tony Allen.
Yeah. Paul McCartney, that there's stories about, because Band on the Run, that Wings album was recorded in Lagos.
I didn't know that.
And they hung out. Now, there's a story that Paul and some of the band were robbed in the street. But if you talk to the Cooties, they say, no, that was made up.
So that's what, we were talking about, the importance, or the presence that Fela had in his country and his whole family, and the effect on his children, essentially. But his music is immortal.
Well, I mean, look, one of the rising bands at the moment are the, Ezra Collective.
Yeah.
And I mean, Shagun and the boys are nearly all,
There's
Nigerian.
there's an Oscar Jerome who's playing kind of very Afrobeat style jazz guitar. When I was gigging before I opened this place, I used to share the stage every now and then with a band called the London Afrobeat Collective.
Yeah.
So we were doing the same circuit at Hootenanny at the Notting Hill Arts Club and all of that.
I mean, there's a lot of those, and then of course, there's a link with Brazilian music, and it works both ways. So my friend Ed Chiesel, who is a historian and helped me do the research for this book, and he has a band called the Afro Funk Collective, but they play a lot of high life, and Ed talks about the musical history, and high life is one of the root musics of West African music from Sierra Leone, Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, and of course the fella's first band was a high life band, and then after he visited the States, Kulis Los Pitos, when he visited the States and he was influenced by James Brown and what have you, and he created Afrobeat. It came out of this. But before high life, there was palm wine music. And palm wine music was played on broken guitars and palm wine bottles and things. And that really originated, and I'm talking from learning from my friend Ed, from the sailors. So, a lot of Nigerian sailors are on merchant vessels, particularly during the war. During the war, a lot of Nigerians worked in the merchant navy, and they would go to Brazil, which was a major trading partner, and they would go to the Caribbean. So the ports in West Africa became a melange of influences from calypso to Brazilian beats, which had come from Africa in the first place.
I was going to say, and vice versa, because Brazilian rhythms originally are African.
Yeah. So
as are Cuban, in Central America.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, a lot of them speak Yoruba. In Bahia and Cuba. So it's intrinsically connected, and that's how it came out. And Afrobeats is just the current commercial format of this melange of music that's come out of West Africa.
I still hope it doesn't put Afrobeat in the shadows, because there's a few times I've spoken to younger generations and they say, what sort of music? I say, I love Afrobeat. And they're like, oh, you love Burna Boy and this. I'm like, yeah, but that's not quite what I was referring to.
Yeah.
And they don't know who Fela was, or, So it'd be nice for that music to kind of stay a bit more present. And I think it's the bands like you mentioned, such as the Ezra Collective, who are staying more close to that original Afrobeat style of music in today's day and age.
And I think they recently, Femi, Sean and Made recorded some unreleased Fela songs with the Ezra Collective.
Oh, wow.
And I know they were working in Abbey Road Studios.
Wow.
And hopefully we'll see that soon. And I think exactly as you say, that will encourage people then to see the connection.
Hopefully. Because I think, and going back to the parallels between Fela and Fela and Bob, there's actually a parallel between Damian Marley and Sean Kuti, who have in fact done an album together, Heavier Yet, which is an amazing album. And I just find that it's curious how their fathers had so much in common. They have so much in common. They are also both individually incredibly talented artists. And then they have come together, and I just find it so beautiful that whole, it's kind of like full circle, I think, and that album for me is amazing. In fact, it was the last album they've made, I think.
And produced by Lenny Kravitz amongst other people, and I think it's probably is commercially most successful, and the tour is I think, because Shell is just the best festival. It's got so much energy. It really carries a young audience, and Yeah, I'm getting a bit old for standing in festivals, so I tend to sit on the side.
Is he coming to the UK this year? Do you know?
Yeah, I know he has some summer gigs.
Yeah.
He had a few earlier, but he's doing a lot in the States with this tour, yeah, and a lot in Europe. But he does have some, yeah, in July, I think, yeah.
Try and get him in here if I can.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you. I know my coffee here in the UK. I know a fair bit about Latin American coffee, a little bit about coffee in Ethiopia, some in Kenya. I know nothing about the coffee scene in Nigeria. What's that like?
Well, you know, there wasn't a great tradition. I think because it was a British colonial uh, place. You know, if you went just over the border into Benin Republic, there are great coffee shops and decent baguettes. But Lagos was a bit of a uh, coffee desert until probably the early 2000s. One or two people started. A friend of mine, Elda, who's Italian, but although born in Lagos, she started a coffee shop, and then my friend Oti with his wine and coffee cellar. Now you can get good, uh, and I think the Lebanese community have a big influence because obviously they're coffee drinkers and they like pretty strong bitter coffee. So I think Nigerians have tended to follow the Lebanese pattern of quite strong coffee.
Yeah, the North African and Middle Eastern way of drinking coffee is really strong.
Yeah,
They often make it with that sediment at the bottom, so you
Yeah.
don't want to turn the cup all the way.
definitely. Not. Yeah.
You'll end up with a mouthful of sediment. It's
Yeah.
really intense.
In fact, there's some of the first. So there are coffee plantations in the northeast
Okay, I
in
didn't
the
know that.
mountains. So, in fact, a good friend of mine is developing an indigenous coffee industry. There are plantations in the northeast highlands. They're not very good. Well, they're not consistent quality for commercials. So, a friend of mine, Richard Alley, started a company called Tea Grey Coffee, and he's investing in trying to improve their harvesting methods so that they're more consistent, and you know you can rely on a consistent blend. And he's uh, uh, he's doing very well, I think.
Well,
But
coffee crops are very much like vines in the sense that you can start with a vine plantation, and it can take years for the crops to get to the level where you want to use it.
Yeah.
And you might have to go through 3, 4, maybe more years and crops, and it takes time until you build it up to the level we want. Unfortunately, that car stops just there because you mentioned about the indigenous coffee.
Yeah.
This beautiful woman on the wall here, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we commissioned this.
No, I didn't know.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So we commissioned this, and if you look carefully, she is actually an Ethiopian coffee picker, picking the coffee cherries off the coffee plant.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So we wanted to highlight the role indigenous people have in coffee,
Yeah.
because people think it comes in a capsule, or coffee's made in the back of a trendy hipster coffee shop like this,
Yeah.
which it's not. So I think it's really important for that people to pay attention to that and be aware of it, and also to make sure, and as much as possible, like you were talking earlier with the multinationals and the mining in Africa, a lot of these big companies, the companies, the Nestle's and what have you, um, we as the small independents, and if we have a way to work direct trade with coffee farmers, which we do sometimes, we try is the important word here, to make sure that the whole process is as ethical as possible.
Yeah.
So, we want to know that whatever farm that we're buying the coffee off, they're treating their farmers well. Their coffee pickers aren't working under slavery conditions.
Yeah.
And traceability is becoming more and more important every day. And people will now shy away from coffee farms which have bad reputations.
And rightly so, yeah.
So I think that's really, really important. And I think it's a good direction for the coffee industry to moving in.
Well, I'll have to send this podcast to Richard, and
Yeah.
maybe
We'll
he'll
get him on
send you
here.
some coffee.
We'll get him on here when he's next in London.
Yeah.
Fantastic. What would you say the highlight of your time in Africa was?
Oh, yeah, that's, I mean, I feel so, Nigerians are very religious. So I tend to say, we thank God, and I feel blessed, because that's uh, how Nigeria is often taught. And I do, feel very blessed. So many great times. But, I think one of my favorite times is in the evening. There's this warmth as the sun is setting, and you've got a Guinness, and maybe some suya, the street food, the peppery meat, and you're just sitting in a bar, not a fancy bar, but just a community bar or a roadside bar, and just enjoying that heat. Maybe they're playing Fella on the radio. That you think that's about as good as it gets.
It's interesting because I feel your highlight is not so much a singular event as to more of a feeling.
Yeah, it is. It was, I mean, there's just so many, hanging out with some of these musicians when Wycliffe was out, that was very special. The jazz series that you mentioned, that was pretty stressful, trying to get things away, but that was, and friendships, over the years, then, going to cultural events, weddings, I mentioned Ed and Mooney's wedding. That was a wonderful thing, but there was so many weddings where, it's great music, and Nigerians love to party, and yeah, I just think I was extremely fortunate.
I've got one question I'm burning to ask you, itching to ask you. Why not stay there? Why come back?
Well, I came back just before COVID, and I was due to go back to um, do roadshow and launch the memoirs book. But yeah, it's very expensive. It's quite a tough place to retire, because if you're going to rent somewhere in Ikoyi, Victoria Island, you're talking like $100,000 a year rent.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it's really expensive. So
okay, that's crazy.
So for a period, I did live in an area that was kind of on the edge of where expats would live, and that was still like $45,000 a year. So, but I'm hoping to go back for the launch of the African edition, the Nigerian edition of the novel. And I'm really fortunate because I've got some good mates. And in fact, Shelton's just built a house, so he has his first proper house, if you like, and his own place. And he's insisting that when I come out, that's the first place I have to stay. So that gives me a good reason to go back, doesn't it?
That's a good reason as any. Keith, thanks so much, man. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Let me just pick this up. Let's plug this one more time. Which of your sons is available to buy?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's in the UK. It's in Chiswick's 2 independent bookshops. Everybody Reads and Bookcase.
Fantastic. Oh, this one here. There we go.
There we go.
Keith, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. It's been lovely.
If you like this episode, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as we will be having weekly episodes launching.